I'm sorry. Who closed the Kessler deal? The entire conference room went dead silent the second I walked in wearing a hospital wristband. 3 hours earlier, I'd been in a hospital bed with heart monitors taped to my chest, finishing a multi-million-dollar contract while nurses told me to stop working. Now I was standing outside my company's champagne celebration, staring at my coworker Nolan holding a trophy with my client's name engraved on it. My boss, Darian Vale, had his arm around him. Couldn't have saved this company without this guy, he said. People were clapping for a deal I closed while hooked 2 and 4. Then Nolan looked at me and didn't say a word. Not there's been a mistake. Not Rebecca actually did this. Nothing. That's when the HR director walked into the room carrying a thick file folder. She dropped it on the table, looked directly at my boss, and said, "We need to discuss the submission records. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates." Nobody moved. The music from the office speakers was still playing quietly in the background, some upbeat corporate playlist that suddenly sounded completely wrong in the silence. Half-empty champagne glasses sat frozen in people's hands. Someone near the back slowly lowered their phone after realizing they'd been recording the celebration. Darian forced a smile first. "Rebecca," he said carefully, like he was talking to someone unstable. "You should really be resting." Resting. I stared at him for a second because 12 hours earlier, he'd texted me from the hospital saying, "You're a lifesaver. I'll handle everything here." And apparently handling everything meant handing my deal to someone else. Nolan finally stepped away from the center of the room, loosening his tie. He couldn't even look directly at me anymore. "Rebecca, listen," he started. "No," I cut in. "Actually, you listen." I held up my phone with the signed contract still open on the screen. My signature timestamp sat right there beneath the Kessler Logistics approval. 2:13 a.m. I remembered exactly where I was when I signed it. Flat on my back. For in my arm. A nurse standing over me asking if I understood I was scheduled for emergency surgery in the morning. And while I was lying there trying not to pass out, these people were apparently planning a promotion party. A few employees exchanged uncomfortable looks. Some of them knew. I could tell immediately. Not the whole truth maybe, but enough to know this celebration didn't feel right. Then I noticed my friend Talia near the far wall. She wasn't celebrating. She looked terrified. The HR director, Elise Chin, opened the folder slowly and pulled out a stack of printed submission logs. Her expression was cold in a way that made my stomach tighten. Darian's voice sharpened. "Elise, this really isn't the place." "It became the place," she replied, "when company records were altered at 3:11 this morning." The room went completely still again. And then Elise turned one page around so everyone at the table could see it. At the top was Nolan's employee ID. Underneath it was my login credential. Rebecca didn't authorize that change. The second Elise said it, every eye in the room shifted toward Nolan. He swallowed hard and looked at Darian before answering, which told me more than his actual words ever could. I thought the account ownership was updated after she got admitted," Nolan said carefully. "Darian told me I was taking lead." Darian stepped in immediately. Too quickly. "Because you did take lead," he snapped. Rebecca closed part of the negotiations, but Nolan finalized implementation details afterward. "That's not true," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The conference room suddenly seemed too warm. My hospital wristband was still digging into my skin, and I could feel the dull ache from the 4 bruises every time I moved my hand. Elise slid another paper across the table. "Rebecca," she said, "did you at any point give Nolan access to your authentication token or approve reassignment of the Kessler files?" "No." Simple. Immediate. Darian exhaled sharply through his nose. "There's obviously confusion about workflow titles here. We don't need to turn this into some dramatic accusation." But nobody was looking at me anymore. They were looking at him. Because he sounded nervous. And Darian Vale never sounded nervous. I glanced toward Talia again. She subtly checked that nobody was watching her, then lifted her phone slightly toward me. A text came through. "Check the timestamps." My stomach tightened. I opened the internal project portal on my phone while Elise and Darian argued quietly across the table. The loading circle spun for a second before the activity logs appeared. Then my chest went cold. At 3:11 a.m., while I was being prepped for surgery, someone had reassigned Key Kessler contract files from my credentials to Nolan's employee account. 3 separate edits. Administrative override access. I looked up slowly. Only senior management could approve that level of change. And standing across from me, suddenly refusing to meet my eyes, was Darian. Then Elise spoke again. "Actually," she said, flipping to another page, "there's a much bigger problem here. The promotion paperwork was filed before the contract was even officially processed." Nobody spoke after Elise said that. Not the executives near the windows. Not the managers holding champagne glasses. Not even Nolan. I watched the color drain from his face as Elise placed another document onto the conference table. Promotion approval, Nolan Pierce. Timestamp, 8:04 a.m. Darian recovered first. "Okay," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded painfully fake. "This is getting blown out of proportion." Nolan was already being considered for senior accounts before this deal. But the deal was used to justify the promotion, Elise replied calmly. The room got quieter somehow. I looked around and realized people were avoiding eye contact with me now, not because they thought I was wrong, but because they were starting to understand exactly what had happened. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft. Darian turned toward me again, lowering his voice like he was trying to reason with me privately even though 20 people were listening. "Rebecca, you've been under enormous stress," he said. "You collapsed yesterday. You're exhausted, medicated, emotional." "Don't do that," I cut in instantly. His expression tightened. "Don't stand there and act like I imagined closing that deal." Nolan finally spoke up. "I did help close it," he said defensively. "After you got admitted, Darian told me you probably wouldn't be back for weeks. Somebody had to take over." There it was. Not guilt. Justification. Like my absence had made me replaceable. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Talia. This time it included a screenshot. Security badge access logs. I stared at the screen. 12:47 a.m. Darian Vale, Executive Access Override, Rebecca Morales' office. I felt my heartbeat spike. I had left my authentication token in my desk drawer when the ambulance took me from work. Darian had gone into my office after I collapsed. Elise noticed my expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked. I looked up slowly. "He used my credentials," I said. And before anyone could respond, Elise closed the folder in front of her and said, "There's one more thing corporate compliance found this morning." The client identified Rebecca Morales as the sole negotiator on the account. Elise's words hit the room like a dropped weight. One of the executives actually muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. Darian straightened immediately. "That doesn't prove anything. Clients don't always understand internal team structure." "Elise," I said quietly, "can I see the statement?" She handed me the printed email. It was from Martin Kessler himself. Rebecca Morales handled all negotiations personally during her medical emergency. Any representation otherwise is inaccurate. I looked back up slowly. So the client knew. Which meant Darian had lied anyway. The room erupted into overlapping voices after that. Managers whispering. Executives arguing. Someone near the back asking if compliance had already contacted legal. Nolan looked trapped now, his confidence completely gone. Sweat was collecting near his collar. Then Elise connected her tablet to the conference room monitor. A giant audit log appeared on the screen. Timestamp after timestamp filled the display. 2:13 a.m. Final contract uploaded from St. Vincent Hospital Network. 2:16 a.m. Rebecca Morales digital authorization confirmed. 3:11 a.m. Administrative ownership reassignment initiated. 3:12 a.m. Nolan Pierce added as primary closer. The room fell silent all over again. Because now everyone could literally see the timeline. I closed the deal. Then someone changed the records afterward. Darian's jaw tightened. This is an internal process issue, not fraud. But nobody looked convinced anymore. Especially not Nolan. He suddenly spoke too fast, words stumbling over each other. Darian told me Rebecca was done here, he blurted out. He said she was too sick to handle the account long-term and the company needed stability. I stared at him. That was the first time he sounded genuinely scared. Not sorry. Scared. Talia finally stepped forward from the wall. I reported the edits to HR 2 days ago, she admitted quietly. The metadata didn't match. Darian turned toward her sharply. You went behind leadership's back? No, Elise interrupted coldly. She followed compliance procedure. Then she opened the final section of the investigation file. Slack exports. Authorization logs. Internal access records. Elise looked directly at Darian. You used an incapacitated employee's credentials to falsify ownership records, she said. Do you understand how serious that is? Darian didn't answer. For the first time since I'd known him. He looked afraid. Nobody in the conference room moved. Darian kept his hands flat against the table like he was trying to hold himself steady. The confidence he carried every day, the polished executive voice, the controlled expressions, the constant need to dominate every conversation, was completely gone now. Elise didn't look away from him. Corporate legal has already reviewed the audit trail, she said. There's no ambiguity here. Then she began laying out the timeline piece by piece. I had closed the Kessler deal myself from St. Vincent Hospital while waiting for emergency surgery. At 3:11 a.m., Darian accessed my office using executive override clearance. He retrieved my authentication token from my desk. Then he used my credentials to transfer ownership records to Nolan before executives arrived the next morning. The promotion paperwork had already been prepared in advance. My stomach turned hearing it spoken out loud like that. Because until then, part of me still wanted to believe there had been some explanation I hadn't seen yet. There wasn't. This had been planned. Nolan looked completely shattered now. I didn't know he used your login, he said quickly, looking at me for the first time since I walked in. I swear to God, Rebecca, I thought. You thought what? I cut in. That I'd almost die finishing a contract and just hand it to you? He didn't answer. Because there was no answer. The executives near the windows started whispering urgently among themselves. One of them asked Elise whether the client had been informed yet. He informed us, she replied. Mr. Kessler contacted compliance personally after seeing internal congratulatory materials naming the wrong employee. That hit the room hard. Not only had they stolen credit from me, they'd been caught because the client noticed. Darian finally tried speaking again. This can still be handled internally, he said carefully. We don't need to destroy careers over one administrative decision. Administrative decision. I actually laughed at that. A short, exhausted laugh I couldn't stop. I was in a hospital bed, I said. I almost died closing that account. Nobody had anything to say after that. 2 security officers appeared at the conference room door a minute later. I hadn't even noticed someone call them. One of the executives stood and looked directly at Darian. Turn over your badge and company devices immediately. Darian's face hardened for a second like he wanted to argue. Then he looked around the room and realized nobody was standing beside him anymore. Not even Nolan. Security escorted him out while employees watched in silence. Nolan's promotion was revoked before the meeting even ended. HR informed him he was being placed under formal investigation for knowingly accepting falsified account credit. And the celebration? The champagne glasses stayed exactly where people left them when they walked out. 2 months later, I came back to the office after finishing recovery therapy. My keycard access had changed overnight. Not revoked. Upgraded. Strategic Accounts Director. The title that should have been mine years earlier. When I walked past the conference room that morning, the same room where they'd celebrated Nolan, I noticed the company had replaced the temporary award display near the entrance. Now there was a plaque recognizing the Kessler Logistics acquisition. Underneath it was one line. Lead negotiator, Rebecca Morales. Before I reached my office, Talia stopped me and handed over a sealed envelope. It came from Kessler, she said. Inside was a handwritten note. Most people would have quit that night. You didn't. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside my desk drawer beside the hospital wristband I'd kept after everything happened. Then I closed the drawer.